Alrighty, so I thought what I would do is go over my code that I wrote for the objects and method week 4 code, learn together. So what I have open here is VS Code, and I've set a breakpoint, and I'm just going to walk you through a few of these lines just to give you that. So the first thing you can see is that I've set up a object called morning list, and so everything is contained in this morning list. And all of my functions, I did set up one value just to do a little tracking of information, number of times I run it. And then I call the first call that I make. And this is one of the things I really noticed with some of the work that you're submitting. And it is a challenging concept, but once you get it, it's really helpful, is the way of helping or understanding how to make functions work together. So I'm going to, on this, all this object, I'm going to call this method, and I'm going to pass into it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. Okay. And so when I execute this line, okay, which I will do here in a minute when I refresh the page, because what happens is once you set the breakpoint, and hopefully you're getting this by now, to then refresh the page so that the JavaScript reruns so that you can actually see it run. And so now I have those breakpoints over here. Okay, I'm sorry, those step through and step over. So I'm going to step into my first method call, which calls in this case my setup data, passing a lot of data into it. Current time, you can see all these here. Right? And then I set, in this case, I haven't run this line. So the line in green means you haven't run it yet. So I'm going to go ahead and execute that. And that makes a calculation. You can even see the numbers it used here. And then I'm going to ask a question if, and this is what we call a truthy value or a falsy value, depending on its value, depending on what it's set to. Okay. So then I do an output. I create a variable showing all of my variables that I'm using. And again, no global data. Everything's set up inside of the object. The only thing that's outside in the global space is me calling it with my different values. So this is the first time we see this, right? And it does take a little bit to wrap your head around what this means. It just is saying that within this object, there is a function that we will call a method that is going to be called. And I'm going to pass to it a couple pieces of information. Okay. In this case, a variable and a string. And so if we execute that, now it's jumped up and it's running this format output. And I set it up to take in, which by the way, this code is almost identical to what I had for last week. It's just refactored into an object method configuration. Okay. So now I've passed into it the text and the heading that I want. And now I'm going to call this function, right, or this method. You can call it a function, but really just know it's a method, because on an object, a function is called a method. So at this point, I'm going to jump over this because I know what this does and it's not helpful here. But you can see the data, the outputs start generating on the page on the other side. So now we're done with that. And we come back here, right? So I've set up most of my things that I need to run. And now I'm actually running the most important thing of this code, which is I'm going to call determine list. Okay, and then I'm setting this determine list. I'm passing into it two variables. Okay, and sometimes it's good to get, the arguments versus parameters, but you can also just say I'm passing that in. Okay, so then I'm going to set up a variable. I'm going to set up my list, as I've talked about before, because no matter what I do, I have to make coffee, although I am getting off of coffee, amazingly. Okay, so if unplanned event, then that's what we do. Now what I want to show you is this line. So what I did here is I set this.list to list. And what that does is, even though you don't see it in here because it was added programmatically, it is now a part of that object. Okay, matter of fact, did I execute the line? I haven't. Let me execute the line, and let me come down here and type morning list, and I want you to see that that has been added. Okay, list. Yeah, so these are, took me a minute here. These are all the functions. This is that list as, and inside of an object, we often refer to this as a key and a value. So key value pairs. This is another key value pair, and these are all methods. So even though you didn't see that when you were originally looking at the code, I added it through JavaScript. And so now I'm also going to add that message. And now I'm done with this. So I'm returning. I'm going to add one to the day, and then I'm going to format the output. So the idea here is, from this one call, what I was able to do is to set up some data, do some basic calculations, output some things, and then call the main thing in my program, which was my determine list. Okay, so this is the idea of making functions work together, or methods, whichever way you want to say it, or think about it, honestly. But that's the way this works. And part of what I saw in many of your work from week 3 was that your functions were just standalone and they had nothing to do with each other. And I think that's because your decision path, and I said this to many of you in my response, was too wide. And you probably want to narrow it so you're really only dealing with one basic decision. That way it helps you make these functions work together in a more logical way. Okay, I'm not going to run through the rest because you've already seen it, but I just wanted to give you a walkthrough of that code. Hope that helps. Talk to you later.